I was in Beijing before Tiananmen Square blew up. We didn't think it would come to that, so I came home. And then, of course, it did blow up on that tragic and memorable weekend. There were two groups of people in Tiananmen Square. The students who came from the city had started the whole rebellion. The troops that came in from the countryside were poor peasant troops and uneducated, and they didn't feel a kinship with the students. So we didn't quite know how they were going to behave.
The estimates of how many Chinese were killed and injured in yesterday's brutal assault on their movement for democracy vary widely, but it is believed that there were hundreds of deaths and injuries.
Early on a Monday morning or late on a Sunday night, I took off for Beijing. I flew to Tokyo first, tried to sneak my way onto a State Department airplane. That didn't work. Somebody at Tokyo airport got me on a British freighter. I landed in Beijing. The place was deathly still. One of the largest capitals in the world, almost not a sound. I had a very resourceful cameraman by the name of Tony Wasserman from South Africa. We'd covered wars all over the world and uprisings in every corner of the planet. And I went out and he had a bicycle and he was putting a soft drink box on the back. And I immediately said, "We're gonna put a camera in there, right?" And he said, "Absolutely."
I know this may seem a little unusual, but it's one of the few ways that we can show you life in the streets of Beijing without getting in trouble with the authorities.
We took off not knowing whether I was going to get shot or whether they were going to pull this off or not. And I rode behind Tony. I was wired up and we could sync it up later. And to our surprise, no one stopped us. Only one Chinese bicyclist bicycled up behind Tony, reached to the box and tickled the lens and then drove away. So that worked so well, I went on the air that night showing for the first time Tiananmen Square post raid by the government military.
Talking with the soldiers these days, the gap between the people and the People's Liberation Army is enormous after the Tiananmen Massacre. Despite those earlier reports during the trouble that there was fighting within the Chinese military, we've seen nothing here except a complete military crackdown.
Early the next morning we got up again. This time we got too clever by half and we had a chase car so we could get tracking shots of me. And I was pedaling by on my bike, Mao Zedong and the portrait of him at the Forbidden City. When the Chinese driver realized what was going on, he stepped on it. And I was pedaling as hard as I could to try to keep up with him. It was a minor coup, but it really did work. We got the first portraits of Tiananmen Square out of China as a result of that. Deng Xiaoping was so shrewd, had such vision, that he wanted to maintain political control. But he knew to do that, he would have to give them some kind of a reward. And the reward was more economic freedom, more economic rewards. And so that was the trade-off.
He said, "If you're interviewing me, forget it. I'm just a businessman here." That's not an uncommon reaction. Most of the people in Beijing are keeping their thoughts to themselves these days. Just a few weeks ago, almost everyone in the city was in the streets expressing support for what was going on in Tiananmen Square. Now there's a campaign of fear that's obviously having its effect on the people.
Did we feel grave danger? Not grave danger, but we were very alert the entire time we were there. I'd spent a lot of time in China at that point, and in fact, in a back alley during that time, a young student came up to me and whispered, "Changing China, Mr. Brokaw, keep it up."
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
I had done 3 years earlier a documentary on changing China, about how it was changing. And it was just one of those magical moments in the middle of nowhere. And then he had to pedal away at her, he was on a bicycle. But I thought, we are reaching somebody. They do know what we're talking about. If you go there now, you find a lot of very prosperous people, a lot of poor people still, but a lot of prosperous people who play by their rules because they're getting rich. But the rules are pretty strict about what they can read on the internet and how they can live their lives. 2,000-year-old civilization went into a period of great darkness and emerged from it, become one of the great economic powers in the world. But what happens at the end of all of this, it's hard to know, because they can't keep the political controls going forever. At some point, there will be a pushback, and I hope it's not violent.